Standing at the mouth of the River Tyne on England's northeast coast, where the Tyne finally meets the North Sea between Tynemouth and South Shields. Two great stone piers stretch out to sea from either side, like arms reaching into the water. One from Tynemouth, one from South Shields, marking the once feared entrance to a river that at one time refused to be entered safely. Looking at it now, stone laid with confidence, a line drawn into a moving sea. It looks like something permanent, something inevitable. But nothing about this place was inevitable. For centuries, this is one of the most dangerous places on the British coast. Sandbanks shifted without warning. Rocks waited just beneath the surface. Ships could be lost within sight of land, torn apart on the feared Black Middens while people on the shore watched helplessly.
And yet, industry demanded this river. So what did it take for men desperate to use the river safely for industry to tame this river, feared by sailors and their families? And how does that struggle for control continue today?
This is Rails and Revolutions. The history that built us. The forces that shaped us.
Before these piers, the river did not arrive neatly at the sea. It wandered, it shifted. Sandbanks moved without warning. Rocks, known as the Middens, waited just beneath the surface to tear vessels apart. The Black Middens are a submerged rock formation at the mouth of the Tyne, made up of sandstone and shale that sits just beneath the waterline at high tide and becomes jagged and visible at low tide. These rocks are very notorious for the way they lurk unseen, as they are at the moment, until it's too late. And they've been responsible for hundreds of shipwrecks over the centuries, often within yards of land and safety. By the early 19th century, the Tyne had become one of Britain's great industrial arteries. Coal from Northumberland and Durham flowed down it in astounding quantities. Wagonways fed the staiths. Railways soon replaced wagonways. Iron tracks bedding inland and outward. Newcastle had grown rich enough by Royal Act in the 1530s to restrict outside coal exports, cementing its dominance.
Ships laden with coal didn't just serve local towns. They fed London's homes, powered factories, and kept navies afloat. Shipbuilding slipped its moorings upriver and grew into a global force here. But at its treacherous mouth, the system kept breaking down.
Every wreck was more than a tragedy. It was a delay, a loss. Coal scattered on rocks, holes smashed within sight of safety. Insurance premiums rose. Confidence wavered. The sea didn't respect timetables. It didn't care about schedules or demand.
And so the question emerged, slowly at first, then urgently. Could the river be forced to behave? The answer came in stone. In 1852, the Tyne Improvement Commission, tasked with improving navigation, won permission to build 2 great piers, one on each side of the river mouth. Construction began on the North Pier in 1854 and the South Pier in 1856. Both projects would take more than 4 decades to complete, hammered by weather and waves that seemed determined to undo them.
The piers were meant to narrow the river's mouth, focusing the tidal flow so the natural scour would deepen and clear the channel. It was hydraulic management on a massive scale. The piers were built from huge stone blocks, tipped seaward with temporary rail tracks laid along the tops so materials could be hauled straight to where they were needed. The industrial machine, rails, stone, labour, pushed forward inch by inch into the North Sea. Then work exposed to winter winds and summer spray. Work stopped only when survival demanded it. Decades of trial, failure, redesign and repair followed.
But even as the stone walls crept outwards, the sea reminded everyone who still held power.
In storms especially, fierce winds and shifting sandbars would drive vessels onto the rocks. During 3 days of storms in November 1864, at least 5 ships were wrecked on the Black Middens, with 34 lives lost in full view of those on shore. The horror of watching people drown so close, yet being unable to reach them, helped spark something new. In the aftermath of those storms, a realization took hold. Courage alone was not enough. Something organized was needed. Something trained, something ready. Out of that grief and frustration came the Tynemouth Volunteer Life Brigade, established on the 5th December 1864, one of the first organised shore-based rescue services of its kind. Unlike lifeboat crews, who launched from harbours and were often powerless in heavy surf, these volunteers work from solid ground. They trained to fight storms from the land itself, using rope, strength and precision, rather than oars. They were drilled under the supervision of HM Coast Guard. Discipline mattered. Timing mattered. Lives depended on it.
Their most powerful tool was the breeches buoy, a canvas seat attached to a pulley system, fired across wrecks using rocket-launched lines. Survivors were hauled one by one from breaking ships, suspended above boiling water, dragged back towards shore. The Brigade's watchhouse, built in 1886 to 87, was deliberately placed above the river mouth and the Black Middens. A permanent lookout, a shelter, and a place of readiness that still stands today. Across the river, the South Shields Volunteer Life Brigade followed soon after. Formally accepted by the Board of Trade in January 1866. Their watchhouse, built on the South Pier in 1866 to 67, clings to the stone edge of the harbour. later additions rising above it as generations took turns keeping watch. Despite these dangers, this river mattered. 6.5 miles to the south, the Northumberland Volunteer Life Brigade, founded in March 1977, completed a line of shore-based rescue along this stretch of coast. At their height, dozens of such brigades existed around Britain. Today, just 3 survive: Tynemouth, South Shields and Sunderland, all operating here on the northeast coast.
They remain active rescue units, declared facilities to HM Coast Guard on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year. The equipment has changed, the training has evolved, but the role remains familiar: to answer when boats cannot launch, when people are cut off by tide, trapped beneath cliffs or swept from rocks to where escape narrows to seconds. The rocks that gave rise to the brigades, the Black Middens, is a name with both a practical and a legendary origin. The word midden is a Scandinavian dialect term for a heap or dump used locally to describe a messy pile, a fitting name for a treacherous reef that seemed to hoard wrecked ships.
Local folklore grew up around the rocks. One traditional tale says the devil himself hurled these rocks into the river mouth, aiming to wreck ships and spoil Newcastle's wealthy sea trade. A dramatic attempt, locals said, to curb the region's prosperity.
Another older legend speaks of a giant named Cor, said to have once claimed the Tyne as his domain. In some versions of the tale, Cor tried to block the river's entrance by throwing huge stones from nearby headlands into the channel. The sea god Neptune, riding the tides, is said to have swept these stones out of the main flow, leaving them just offshore. Ever since, those stones have become the hazard known as the Black Middens, claiming ships and men alike.
These stories aren't just fanciful extras. They were early attempts by coastal communities to explain a landscape that was at once vital and lethal. A set of rocks that could turn the promise of homecoming into tragedy. And if stories were the first way people tried to make sense of the danger, then lights were the next. A practical answer to the same question: how to keep the ships alive in a place that wanted them dead. As well as the physical protection afforded by the piers, mariners needed visual guidance. A language of light that can speak even in the darkness and storms. As the piers neared completion, a lighthouse was constructed on each. At South Shields on the South Pier stands a 39-foot lighthouse with a red lantern marking the southern entrance. It was built in 1895 along with the counterpart at Tynemouth and began operating in the late 1890s once lanterns were installed. These lights were built at the South Shields Pier blockyard and then placed on the pier heads. The South Pier light shows sector lights, different colours depending on the angle, with the green sector marking safe passage around offshore hazards, like Belhugh's Rock. On the North Pier, closer to Tynemouth Priory, sits the River Tyne North Pier Lighthouse, the tallest of the 3.
Originally, the lighthouse had been built here when construction began in 1864, but the pier was damaged during storms in 1867 and 1897. The 1897 storm left the lighthouse cut off for 12 years while repairs were carried out. The lighthouse was eventually demolished and the current one built in 1903, using some stone from the original by Trinity House. But it didn't become fully operational straight away. The pier itself had been damaged and rebuilt after storms, and the lighthouse only came into operation on the 15th of January 1908, once the breakwater and pier reconstruction were finally complete.
The pier stretches a remarkable 2,950 feet from Tynemouth Priory, a long stone finger reaching into the North Sea. At roughly 75 feet high, the lighthouse has a commanding presence, and its lantern is believed to have been reused from the earlier lighthouse that stood here. It became the definitive northern marker for ships approaching the Tyne, a tall beacon guiding vessels through a channel that had once been treacherous and uncertain. Between these two and closer inshore to South Shields, stands the Groyne Lighthouse. Built before the piers due to shifting sands that threaten the river entrance and Little Haven Beach.
Between 1861 and 1867, a Groyne pier was constructed to redirect sediment. Newcastle Trinity House built a distinctive Groyne lighthouse, first lit on 30th of October 1882. It is a 49-foot red tower with an octagonal corrugated iron lantern, standing as a guide into the harbour. Groyne is also one of the few lighthouses in the country to have not an operational foghorn, but a fog bell. Maintenance of the lighthouse against the relentless elements is ongoing. In 1962, concrete was poured around the lighthouse's base, a practical bulwark against the sea's slow gnawing at the shore.
Decades later, the lighthouse, still faithfully guiding vessels into the River Tyne, would again face the forces of wind and water. In October 2023, Storm Babet hammered the coast, damaging the pavement and infrastructure around the lighthouse and underscoring how relentless nature could be. By June 2024, a major restoration project was underway. A £250,000 programme of works began in mid-June, carried out by specialist contractors and supported in part by a £100,000 donation from the Barbour Foundation, the charity arm of Barbour Clothing, whose connection to the lighthouse dates back to its appearance on the company's clothing and catalogues as far back as 1908.
This wasn't just maintenance. The restoration involved careful cleaning, painting, repairs to the worn fabric of the building, and improvements to the surrounding pavement and handrails. Proactive steps to protect both the lighthouse and the people who pass by it. The Port of Tyne, custodians of this maritime sentinel since the late 1960s, said the Barbour support made it possible to start earlier than expected. A nod to the value placed on this icon by the wider community.
In preserving the Groyne, these efforts reaffirm the lighthouse's dual role, an enduring navigational aid for shipping and a symbol etched deep into the South Shields coast identity, still resilient against storms and still shining for those who know its story.
Together, these three lights guide mariners at sea, forming a visual corridor, a northern light, a southern light, and an inner harbour reference. They are all operational today under the Port of Tyne Authority.
But how did mariners here navigate before these lighthouses? Well, the answer is they used obelisks. At the law, paired stone obelisks were built in 1832 by John Turnbull on a promontory overlooking the river mouth.
These towers acted as range markers. When aligned, they indicated the safest channel to enter. These markers, unlit but precise, were essential in the early 19th century before mechanical lights existed. A small watchtower built by Trinity House around 1830 once stood here near the beacons. Pilots lived nearby and used stairs down to their boats to chase incoming ships through changing conditions. Although the watchtower was demolished in 1970, the memorial now marks where it stood. Even with guided walls and lights, danger didn't disappear. The Black Middens continued to lurk, especially in storms. Wrecks kept happening into the 20th century. Ships driven onto reef and sand. Hulls breaking where safety seemed closest.
Today, the piers and lighthouses feel calm. People fish off the walls. Walkers trace the path out into the North Sea. Ships the size of which the builders of the piers could not have imagined now pass safely by. The lights still blink at night, coded flashes that carry centuries of trial, error and adaptation. Nothing here is at rest. The sea still tests every joint. Storms still rip stone from concrete. Repairs are ongoing. The walls, the beacons, the lights, they don't defeat the North Sea. They negotiate with it.
The Tynemouth Piers, the three lights, and the history of beacons remind us that what looks permanent is often just a constant project of maintenance against forces far older than the industries these piers help protect.